Jacob Zuma is no longer the country's president, and the question now is what work needs to be done for the ANC to become the united force it once was. ANC's Nickolaus Bauer joins us for a discussion from outside Luthuli House, I suppose, where all of those discussions will happen. Nickolaus, a very good morning to you. And you are outside Luthuli House. I mean, that is where, that is the heart of this party, of the ANC. And what is expected to happen there now? We know for the next couple of days, lots of focus will be on Parliament in Cape Town and a little bit on the union buildings as well. But what are we expecting when the dust has settled will happen in those rooms inside Luthuli House, in those offices?
Well, to be a fly on the wall within the Luthuli House ANC headquarters, there was a very brief press conference by the ANC yesterday, addressed by Deputy Secretary General Jesse Duarte, essentially thanking Jacob Zuma for his resignation and once again encouraging South Africans to treat him with respect and also paying homage to his time as leader. This has been a very, very difficult time, as one could imagine, for the governing party following their Nasrec elective conference, and we wait to see now how they will manage the further transition with plans to swear in Cyril Ramaphosa as president of the country in the next couple of hours later on this afternoon in Parliament. And as far as we understand, the State of the Nation address taking place tomorrow in Cape Town, tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. We can tell you, though, that it, along with it being an extremely difficult decision, we can argue that it wasn't necessarily unanimous, that decision by the National Executive Committee to recall President Jacob Zuma. And we know that due to the top six and, of course, also the National Executive Committee that was elected in Nasrec not being from one slate, we can only imagine that the road forward is also going to be a very windy one, Rebecca.
Yeah, well, we know that there have been lots of tensions there at Luthuli House. We know the split in the party, even though some of those cracks appear to be papered over now, Nickolaus. We were talking to Dan earlier just about former president. It's going to take a while to get used to that. Former president Jacob Zuma's supporters, some of whom have turned, some of whom have been very quiet. We know that those tensions have been there, but I would imagine that this decision by him will not take those tensions away completely, will not ease those tensions completely. There might be more of the same, because those who stood by him steadfastly now wondering what's going to happen to them within this party.
Well, indeed, many people thinking that you're hearing all sorts of things from analysts, from South Africans that we've spoken to, people speaking on social media saying the nightmare is over, there's no more Jacob Zuma, so it'll all be fine and dandy. But the fact of the matter is the governing party has a very, very difficult road to follow in the weeks and the months to come. And it also, how the ANC is going to chart this way forward will in many ways depend on the government that Cyril Ramaphosa chooses, at least his cabinet, as head of state. And it'll be a very, very delicate balancing act to try and keep all of the former Zuma allies on side. As you can imagine, you've already alluded to the fact that a lot of them have already changed their allegiances, but we can imagine that it won't be as simple as changing from black to white or left to right, whichever way you want to put it. So how the ANC manages this succession of Cyril Ramaphosa to replace Jacob Zuma is going to be a very, very difficult conundrum for them. Let's also remind ourselves they did their best to try and illustrate that Jacob Zuma had done no wrongdoing. There certainly must have been reasons as to why they recalled him from office, but the ANC doing their level best to try and illustrate a united front. I wonder whether or not they're going to be able to keep up that facade, or whether or not it will indeed be a sincere show of unity as the next government comes in and that State of the Nation address gets delivered in Parliament tomorrow. I suppose that's the very, very first steps, but we'll have to see how things unfold in the weeks and the months to come. Rebecca.
And Nickolaus, like we were also just saying a little earlier, South Africans more aware, I think, than they ever have been in recent history, I should say, of the politics and what affects them. I mean, I don't think you'd find a South African who wasn't aware of what was going on and having an opinion of it. So very aware, very politically aware, much more so than they were a couple of years ago, I think, just listening to reactions so far. So you would think that the ANC, this is going to be a matter of urgency, that the party is going to have to hit the ground running, because 2019 is not a long way away. That general election would happen. I mean, we'll have an announcement officially next year of the actual date, but it would be about a year or just a little over a year from now. And they'll have to do this to gain confidence, paper over those cracks, seem united. Also, with many questions being asked about how they've handled this particular situation, and of course what they'll allow Jacob Zuma to get away with. What was part of the deal? What did they tell him that he finally made that announcement last night? What did they allow him? Let's put it that way.
Well, indeed, Rebecca. I mean, many people are arguing over the legacy of Jacob Zuma following his resignation yesterday. One thing is for certain, he's awakened the politics of the country. A lot of people not necessarily being as actively engaged and active citizens as we've seen in the past several years, the final years of the Zuma presidency. And what you have now is a more active citizenry that is going to be watching the ANC's every single move. And I'm sure this is what they kept in mind when they decided to recall President Jacob Zuma, when they had in front of them an election which you quite rightly said is only about a year away. And they have a very, very tall order ahead of them. Not only do they need to keep everybody on side within the party, they need to make some drastic moves to regain the trust of South Africa. Or they could very well face the same challenges that they did in the local government elections and be facing a severe diminishing electorate or share of the electorate with opposition parties saying that essentially, and quite rightly, maybe in many aspects, that it wasn't only Jacob Zuma's fault, and essentially you had the ANC supporting him through thick and thin, and perhaps in many ways it wasn't just Jacob Zuma, it was the ANC's fault, and they need to prove that the party has turned a corner, is changing their ways, and is capable of continuing to lead with the trust of South Africans to get them out to the ballot boxes during that general election next year.
All right, thanks very much for that. ANC's Nickolaus Bauer, he's outside Luthuli House, the home, the heart of the ANC. Should we say a still broken ANC? Should we say a somewhat renewed ANC? I suppose time will